So, hi everyone. I'm excited to start the 6th webinar of Let's Talk OD. It's all about our workplace, and this webinar is about leadership, influence, and self-awareness. If you have any questions or comments, we would love to have it. Just add it in the chat, as I saw before someone started, and we will address them. And today with me is Moshe Cohen. Moshe Cohen teaches negotiation, leadership, and mediation at Boston University and in companies and organization worldwide through the negotiating table, which he founded in 1995. His 2 books, Callables, How to Negotiate When Negotiation Makes You Nervous, and Optimism is a Choice, and Other Timeless Ideas, provide a unique perspective and have gotten great reviews everywhere. And I am Nili Bulis, a leadership and organizational development consultant, passionate about understanding people, organization, and the processes between them. And okay, so before we start answering the questions, maybe it is essential to mention that all the subjects we are about to discuss overlap, and it is hard to have one without the other. Still, we will try to isolate and focus on each subject to be much clearer, to understand and easy to implement for yourself and for your organization. So let's start with the first one. We talked about leadership. What are the 2 or 3 components that are important to a leader? Moshe, why don't you start?
Oh, thank you, Nili. And I just want to reinforce what you said, that all these things are interrelated. So whether we're talking about leadership or influencing, there's a huge component of self-awareness, because all of those things are a relationship between the person leading and the people that they are leading. And as a leader, you envision a direction to go in, and then you try to influence the people that you're leading to help you and the organization move in that direction. So to that extent, a huge component of leadership is self-awareness. Leaders know who they are, they know what they value, they know what's important, and they set the example for their teams by acting in accordance with those things that they value. So that would be the first thing that I would say about leaders. The second thing is that leaders communicate. They communicate in both directions. They spend a lot of time listening to their followers, but they also communicate their ideas over and over again and as clearly as they can to their followers, so the followers understand what direction to go in. And as part of that, leaders articulate a vision of where they want to go. So a third very important component of leadership is being visionary, in the sense of thinking not just about what you're doing, but about the results of what you're doing and what the world will look like after you've done it, and then articulating that to people and enlisting them into that vision.
Nice, thank you, Moshe. I think leadership, there is so much definition and so much component, and it's really different, and it depends on what we are looking for, what assignment the organization is about to take, what mission, what setting, what is the culture of the geographic place and the culture within the organization. But trying to consider all of those, I would like to point out what we call the emotional intelligence, as you mentioned, one component of it. And to mention what we call today is the EQ, and it's cover 4 titles: the self-awareness, the social awareness, which is both about being aware, and the other 2 is about, the other 2 elements is about the more operative, and it's related about how you regulate and manage yourself and how you manage relationship around you. And I'm happy you pointed out the beginning is about the self-awareness, as I agree with you. This is the first and the beginning to any other thing that you start. It's like, where is the first step? And it's probably it.
Absolutely.
So I wanted to go to the word that you said about influence, about how leaders need to have influence about the people that are around them. How do you influence other people's behaviors or make it more pragmatic to manager? Maybe what can give them as tips about influence, Moshe?
So influencing is really, a close cousin of negotiation. So a lot of the things that we think about in terms of negotiation also apply to influence. The first thing is that you always try to influence people, just like you're always trying to negotiate with people. So you need to build a relationship. You need to engage them. You need to make yourself more of a person to them. And you do that by listening. You do that by inquiring and building a relationship before you try to influence somebody else. The second thing is, it's much easier to influence someone's behavior if you know what they are interested in, if you know what drives them. So just as in negotiation, the main thing that we do is find out what is driving the person that we're negotiating with. The same thing has to do with influence. As a leader within an organization, you need to know your followers. You need to know what motivates them. You need to know what scares them. You need to know what excites them. And then you use those things to influence their behavior. Beyond that, you need to then create opportunities for them to act in accordance with their interests, but also in ways that align with yours. So the first part of influence has to do with the people. The second part has to do with understanding their interests. And then the third is communicating with them in such a way that will align them to the interests.
So Moshe, I will go with what you just offer about getting to know them. How would you suggest to do it? Is that like open conversation? Is that something initiated by the leader? Is that just going to the coffee machine to have a talk? So
I think all of the above. I think that we need to open both formal and informal channels for, in order to get to know people. Above everything else, we've got to become better listeners. In chapter 9 of Kali Wobbles, I talk a lot about the listening triangle, which is a tool for drawing out the interests of people that we're working with. And it's really a focused version of active listening. You ask open-ended questions. You keep those questions really short, so they don't contain a whole lot of opinion and judgment from you. You learn to stay silent long enough for people to actually answer your questions. When they do speak, you listen very carefully, try to hear what's behind the words, and then you reflect back to them, either using their words, your words, or just really reflecting back the essence of what they're saying. And you do that over and over again. Now, you can do that formally, right? And I really recommend that leaders set up formal times for conversations with the people they're leading. And you can take every opportunity to do that informally. If you do run into somebody at the break room, or you have time after a formal meeting and two of you remain on the Zoom, that's a great opportunity to engage in some informal conversation and use those open-ended questions to get people to open up to you. The second part of that is transparency. You want to be able to share some of what you're thinking so you can become a person to them. So they don't think of you as just the boss or the leader, but they think of you as a person they can relate to.
Right. I want to repeat what you said about listening. I think this is maybe, for me, it's one of the biggest thing, listening, because I feel that sometimes people don't need really the judgment, but they really need someone, and they either not need any advice. They probably know what's the right thing to do or how to act, but they do need someone to listen to them. And I do believe it's something really big. There are, as you mentioned, a few techniques about how just to keep yourself quiet and just listening. And I want to add to this empathy. Empathy, it seems to me, the other component that's really help people to connect one to another. I can give multiple examples about managers that, for example, I can bring one manager that someone at the end of the vacation, they stay longer at the resort that was like the designated vacation, and someone was still hungry and he ordered some lunch. And this manager said, if you order lunch and it's true that the vacation is over, but I'm going to pay for this lunch. And this small thing, which is, it's over the hours, but if this is the time that you can have another empathy, another something else that you can help someone in any way, and this was involved even action, which it doesn't have to be always with action. It could be just, I am with you, I am with you, whatever it was, I'm in the same page and I listen to your problem and I understand where you're standing and how can I help? This component of empathy, I think it's so much connect other people that it is very critical to building relationship and to be influencer. And I want to summarize it. It's interesting for me to think about influencer is actually doing two other things that are under the radar, which is listening and give empathy, and not actually to be very much active in order to be influencer.
Mm-hmm. So, I have a very simple definition of empathy that I use with people. And my simple definition of empathy is demonstrating to the other person that you get it. Right? You don't have to fix their problem. You don't have to sympathize. You don't have to agree with them, but you have to demonstrate that you get it. And that starts with intention. That starts with focusing on understanding rather than on judgment, and really intending to see what's there and intending to understand rather than intending to take some sort of action. Beyond that, what you say is like the offering to help. That actually is a service orientation, which is part of emotional intelligence, which is really thinking about how can I help the people that I'm interacting with. And you put those two things together, and they're very powerful. And because once you've demonstrated to someone that you can understand them and you've demonstrated that you care, they relate to you in a completely different manner. And then they work with you in a much more productive way.
Yeah, agree. I think this is probably the key to have the people with you. Regardless to the other component, I mean, like, I'm not neglecting them, but I think this is the most two that you can really connect very easily. And as you mentioned, in every way that's coming up to you, and you can do it. I want to give more time for us to talk about self-awareness.
Mm-hmm.
It's title that's been used a lot. And I will ask first, how can we boost our self-awareness? What tips can we share about this? Maybe you can say what you're doing like personally and how other ways that you know and aware how to do it.
So self-awareness comes from a bunch of different directions. Part of it comes from reflection. And one of the problems is that we often don't have time to reflect on what we're doing. We're so busy doing that we don't have time to think about it. So if you're going to be increasing your self-awareness, you've got to build in some time for that self-reflection, because otherwise your life will eat that up. I'm a very busy person. I have multiple jobs, I'm writing, I'm marketing, I'm doing all these things. And yet, if I don't take the time to slow down once in a while and think about what I'm doing, then I don't develop that self-awareness. A really good device to use is to try to write stuff down as you reflect, because that forces you to slow down. It forces you to record things. It gives you something to look back at after you've recorded it. And different people have different techniques for doing that. Some people use, I'm old-fashioned, I use pencil, but some people use, type it. Some people dictate it. Whatever way you want to do it, slow down enough that you can reflect. A second huge component of self-awareness comes from feedback from others. I believe it was in Julius Caesar that Shakespeare said that you can't see yourself without a mirror. And we use other people as mirrors. And there's things that we just can't see about our own behavior that other people can see. And if we ask them, they'll tell us. But that means that we have to create the kind of trusting relationship with them that they will tell us. I mean, imagine that I'm your boss and I call you into my office and I say, okay, tell me what you think about me. The chances that you'll give me an honest answer are almost zero, unless I've made that a safe thing for you to do. So the first thing you need to do is build up to that by demonstrating to people that when they give you feedback, you listen to it and you don't chop their head off. And by building this credibility, by building this trust over time, when you do ask for feedback from them, you're going to get more honest feedback. The second thing is you got to think about who are you asking, when are you asking them, who else is around, what format are you asking them in, and to make sure that you create an environment where you're likely to get honest, transparent answers.
Yeah, I just want to maybe even to stop and start again, and maybe just name what we call self-awareness in a bit a different name, just in order to highlight the need for it. That will everybody understand if you're being, you want to be self-developed, or especially for leaders and manager. I think to be self-aware is to know your own blind spots, and to understand what's your body and mind already reacting while you are still analyzing the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I think that sometimes our body language is already saying something to the other people around us. And to be self-aware is the best thing, is to understand first how I really feel about specific people, situation, or where am I, or what I love, or what I like, or what kind of communication I prefer. All those bunch of things, the more you are aware, you can play the game better. And I think it's absolutely what you said about feedback. I am taking it with two hands. It's like feedback is absolutely one of the things that connected to listening, as we said, everything is overlap. If you don't open to yourself to have some feedback, it is very hard to develop.
I agree.
Yeah.
At the same time, feedback is often very difficult to hear. Right. I love feedback so long as you're telling me things that I'm going to enjoy. You can tell me I'm wonderful anytime you want. It's the other stuff that's a lot harder to listen to. So a lot of people are open to feedback in principle, but once it starts becoming negative, or once it starts becoming more difficult to hear, then we're not quite as open to it and becomes a lot harder to process. So yeah, I absolutely agree with you. And if you look at Daniel Goleman's definition of self-awareness, part of that is emotional self-awareness. If I'm frustrated, but I'm not aware that I'm frustrated, I'm just going to act it out. Whereas if I'm frustrated and aware of it, then I can manage it. The second part, though, is accurate self-assessment, which is to see myself as other people see me. So I might think I'm funny, you might think I'm annoying. So I need to realize that some people who hear me will think I'm annoying rather than funny.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think just commenting about feedback, I think we have a very judgmental component that we are adding to feedback. But I think if we're using a very gentle language, and rather than to share general statement, if someone is just speaking about how he feels about someone, this is just giving, the right feedback about how it goes. And it's much easier for other to digest this feedback, kind of, if it makes sense.
I agree.
So it's also up how you're saying it. Not every feedback needs to be so harsh, and it doesn't need to hurt. I have to say that myself, like just yesterday, I had with a good conversation with a good friend of mine, and she called it let's clean our hearts, just say whatever we want. And it was very open, and it's true that it was, friend that I can trust, so I can hear. what she said. And obviously, I try to take as much things as I can, stand. But it was, I came with some things and she came up with others. And it was very relieving in a way, actually, though it seems that I'm not the best and not perfect person, but, I'm still a good friend and I'm okay. And it's good to hear, and it's good to be open. But it's true that the environment around us is, it needs to be less, when we're talking about feedback, it's less about how we are taking it. Maybe we just say something how you feel about. I think it's much more constructive. What do you think, Moshe?
So I think there's a number of things to think about. One, it's very different to exchange feedback with a friend and to ask for feedback as a leader. When you're in a position of power over someone, and if you ask them for feedback, it's a very different dynamic than if you are a peer or a friend. So you need to keep that in mind, and that's where creating the safety comes in. The second thing is Chris Argyris came up with a model called the Ladder of Inference, where he said that normally we communicate based on our conclusions, and that our conclusions are developed from some sort of underlying data that we observe through a bunch of steps to lead to our conclusions. And the concept he came to was the idea that when you share your feedback, instead of sharing your conclusions, actually share the data that you observe, because the other person's going to hear it in a very different way. So if I think, well, you made a whole lot of errors in this document, you did a pretty sloppy job, and my feedback to you is that I think you do sloppy work. Well, you're going to take that very personally. Whereas if I point out that you made 7 errors in this one page of the document, that's me sharing my observation of what I observed, and you're going to be able to hear that in a very different way. So that's the second thing. And so the third thing is there's invariably a cultural component to this, right? In some cultures, we communicate much more directly, and in other cultures, we have to be much more discreet, much more indirect. It's been said that in the UK, if you say to someone, I think that's a very courageous idea, what that means is, I think you're totally crazy, right? But you can't just say that, because the mode of communication is a lot more indirect. Whereas, I did classes in Germany, and my students in the class would raise their hand and go, your idea doesn't make any sense. So, you have to adjust to the culture you're in and the power dynamic. And you have to be thoughtful about what you're communicating in terms of the difference between your conclusions and the data that you observe. And the final thing I want to say is feedback works much better if you can get invited to give it. A lot of times we barge in and just give someone feedback without asking them, without warning them. So what I like to do is I like to say to someone, I've observed some things that I think might be helpful for you to hear. Can I share them with you? And then I'll wait until they say yes. And once they say yes, they're listening to what I say in a very different way, and they're going to be much more receptive. Whereas if I just go ahead and do it, they may or may not even hear what I have to say. They're going to have such a strong emotional reaction to what I'm saying and to the fact that I'm saying it, that what I'm saying is going to be completely missed.
Right. I would agree with you. And I would even add, if leaders are looking for feedback, they're the one that should initiate a conversation to do it. When you are already asking, them, if you want me, is that a question, or do you want me my input or no? I know that in my family with my kids, I'm like, sometimes they are saying something and I'm saying, do you want me, is that a really question that I need to answer, or you don't need my opinion? Obviously they are teenagers, so obviously no, the answer is no, and I'm accepting this, but it's fine. But I think even just, sharing it, that I do have something to give them, and it's up to them if they're taking it or not. And I think leaders should really initiate those conversations, as hard as they are.
I think you also have to be really thoughtful about why you're asking for the feedback or why you're giving the feedback. You have to be purposeful, because I think a lot of times we have a certain intent in our mind, but it's really different from our intent. Like sometimes when I'm in a group of people, I make a comment because I think I have something valuable to add, but my real underlying purpose is I want to show people how smart I am. right? And if we start acting inconsistently with what we're really doing, other people can see that discrepancy, and we're not going to be as effective in getting heard and getting action based on what we're saying. So that's a big part of self-awareness as well, is to be aware of what are your real intentions and not just the intentions that you think you have.
Agree. I want to take us back to the more tactics, how to do meditation. I want to share that I'm doing meditation every day in the morning. I'm doing it for a few minutes. I think it's one of the things that's very comfortable to me. For a long time, I used to practice yoga, which actually is the same kind of, as it is a set of the same order of exercise, which really like kind of composition that you are needs to concentrate in it and not to give any other thoughts to interfere with this. I find it very helpful. I find writing a diary, I know that some people are doing it. It's a great way. And I also want to share that as organizations, the organization that I know closely, and I classify them as very successful, they're doing from time to time just meeting about reflection. And I think it's one of the great thing how they're helping themselves, just, mentioning the good stuff, good action of the employees, rather than things that they need to improve. And I think this reflection it's calling it different names, but the main thing is just reflection. It's not necessarily about what are the actions that's coming from out of it, but usually it's like the biggest brainstorming that organization can have. Do you have something similar, Moshe, that you know about organizations rather than just people themselves?
Different organizations do this in different ways. Some do it as more of a regular practice. Some organizations take time in specific retreats where they take people away from the work to focus on this kind of thing more intensely for a day or a couple of days. So different organizations do it differently. What's interesting though is I think in many ways it has to come from the top. It has to be driven as part of the culture, because otherwise there's this attitude of, I think you guys should reflect. and that just doesn't give you any credibility, and it doesn't really motivate people to do it. This is one of those places where you really have to set the example. You have to walk the talk. And if the leaders are reflective and they encourage that kind of reflection, then other people will follow suit. And in most organizations, leaders have the most contact with a fairly small group of people. They might know everybody in the company, but they interact intensely with a group of 5, 6, 8 people, not that many more. And if they set that as the norm for interacting with their own executive team, then that's going to be propagated down, because that's going to become part of the culture. If they don't value it, it's not going to really work.
Right. I completely agree. I think whenever there is 2 messages that given to the employee or in general, and one of them is what we call hidden. I mean, like the one that you really act to it, but you're not saying it. This is the stronger one. So if you can, announce, now do reflect, please. And at the same time, you are not doing it. The action of not doing it will be much stronger. And that's what the employee will take. There is no real way to do it. And being authentic about it and being aligned with what you're saying is absolutely one of the things that is important, actually, as in leaders in general. But absolutely in promoting any of those things of reflection or helping self-aware on being also social awareness.
I'll give an example. There are lots of organizations now that talk about work-life balance, and part of work-life balance is leaving work at work and not working 24/7. And you have managers who will talk about that and talk about the importance of work-life balance, but then they're sending emails to their direct reports at 11 o'clock at night and on weekends. And that conflict of the messaging of, yes, here's what I say I believe, But if you look at what I'm doing, I'm sending all these emails on the, late at night and on weekends, that creates this dissonance. And moreover, it puts a lot of pressure on the employees who then feel like, oh, I need to respond because, well, my boss just sent me an email at 11:30 and my boss is up, so I need to respond at 11:30 at night. And that negates everything that they were saying about the work-life balance. And it creates this sense of hypocrisy, like my boss doesn't really care about work-life balance, but my boss is just playing lip service to this because the company made them do it. And that creates, that starts eroding the trust with the boss, eroding the trust with the company, and it creates a lot of confusion for people as to what they should do. So one advice I had for bosses, because some bosses are compulsive and they really have to work on weekends and nights, and they've got a ton to do, is write the emails, but don't send them until Monday. Right? If you really don't intend for your people to reply until Monday, queue them up, but send them all on Monday morning, right before work begins. And that way you don't create that kind of dissonance for people. But just having the presence of mind to think about doing that rather than just firing off the email, that is a huge piece of self-awareness. You have to be aware of your impulse to react and send something, and then you have to engage in some self-management to not do it anyway. You have to have the social awareness to realize the impact of that on your employees, right? And then you combine all those three things to say, right, what do I want for my employees? What kind of experience do I want them to have from this interaction? And how can I use my own actions to create that kind of experience? And that's true whether we want them to reflect, whether we want them to take time off, whether we want them to work harder. It really is a combination of all of those four components of emotional intelligence that gets the job done. And a lot of the things that you see in that fourth quadrant, which is the relationship management, involve things like influencing skills and negotiation skills and time management skills and team management skills and those kind of things.
Yeah, agree. I think one of the things that's interesting about what you just said, that it's either if the leader or the manager is aware, but his action are actually following his real beliefs either way. So, as you say, compulsive, he's writing, he's not always aware at the time that he's doing it. But if he will do some reflection, he might see that it's not all his action really aligned with what he's saying, his values, or maybe someone, other leaders are, like make them think or make him say those kind of things.
Well, if you want to go deeper into self-awareness, I would advise that leader to actually pause for a moment and ask themselves why they feel so compelled to work nights and weekends. What's driving that? Is it fear? Are they afraid that they'll fall behind, or their boss won't be impressed if they don't work weekends? Is it that they're just being compulsive and hate to have work waiting for them on Monday? Is it that they're excited about the work and they just can't put it down because they love it so much? I mean, there are different motivations, and I'm not saying it's bad to do that. I'm not saying it's bad to work on the weekends. I'm just saying know why you're doing it, because unless you know why you're doing what you're doing, you can't make deliberate choices as to what to do and what to do differently. And that's one of the big things on the whole self side of emotional intelligence is I can't decide what to do unless I know what I'm doing and why I'm doing it. And then once I have that awareness, then I can make decisions. Up to that point, I'm just being reactive. And I'm no different than a cat chasing a string at that point. The cat's not thinking about it. It just chases the string. And we're no different from cats unless we stop and think about what we're doing and why we're doing it.
Absolutely. So from this, I'm going to jump to other subject about change management, which I think it's relate about influence and self-awareness and how you manage others. How can a leader promote or manage a change in their organization? It's a very big question. So maybe I will just ask best advices that you can share, Moshe.
Well, the first question I would ask is, does the change need to happen? Right? Sometimes we just change in order to change, but really good, effective change has to be motivated by some underlying reason why it's necessary. So if you can't make the case for why this change is necessary, meaning why the current situation is no longer tenable, you might want to think about whether you want to engage in the change process to begin with, because you're going to have a very difficult time selling it unless you can create some urgency around it, driven by, the current situation not working anymore. The second thing is you need to realize people don't want to change. We are creatures of habit. We love being comfortable. Anytime we have to do a change, that means we lose, right? Right now, the computer I'm talking to you on is a 2015 computer. And, it's got about the same battery life as a AAA battery at this point. And I really need to change it. And I know what computer I'm going to buy, but I haven't done it yet. I haven't actually just hit the button and bought it. Why? Because once I buy this new computer, I'm going to have to port all my stuff to it. I'm going to have to get some new software packages. All change involves pain and loss, and we're reluctant to do it. So if you're going to be effective, getting people to change, or getting people, the organization to change, you have to recognize and then have a strategy for dealing with this resistance to change. And you also have to have a lot of empathy for it, because if you were the one on whom the change was being foisted, you'd be equally resistant to it. So one of the things you need to do is slow down, give people time to catch up with what you're doing, and then communicate a lot about what the change is, why it's necessary, what each individual's role is going to be through the change process and when it's done, because change creates a lot of fear, right? If I know my job now and you're telling me you're going to change all of the job descriptions and all of the organization chart and all that, my biggest fear is, will I have a spot when all this is over? Will I know what I'm doing? Will I be doing work I like? And the more that you can understand my concerns and communicate those things to me, the better that is. Secondly, you have to be really clear about the result of the change, right? What is the world going to look like once this change is complete? And you need to think about it, and you need to articulate it from the point of view of the person who's going to be dealing with a change. So if, let's say, your company is going to move from paper timesheets to electronic timesheets, right? Telling people, well, from now on, you're going to fill these out electronically rather than in paper, that's not exciting to anybody, right? But you can also motivate them by saying, from now on, you can complete your timesheet from anywhere, and you're going to get paid regardless of whether you're able to come into the office and submit your paper timesheets or not. Right? You're going to have complete flexibility in when and how you do this. You're going to be able to do it on your phone. You're going to be able to do it on your tablet. You're going to be able to do it on your computer. Now I'm excited. Now I know why I need these electronic timesheets. So you want to describe things not from the point of view of what you're going to do, but what's the outcome, right? If you're going to have a meeting with people, don't tell them we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do the other thing. That's boring. That's nobody wants a rundown. What they want to know is the meeting started. The meeting is going to end at some point. What's different? What do I know that I didn't know? What have we completed that wasn't completed before? So you got to be visionary in the way you describe the world. That excites people. You can say, by the end of this meeting, we're going to have a decision as to which of these two platforms we're going to go with. And we're going to pick the better platform for us. Now I'm excited. I want to know that. I want to be part of that meeting. And then you need to tell people how they can be involved. The more you involve the people who are going to be affected by the change in creating the change, the less resistance you're going to get, because now they have ownership, and everybody wants to build something and that they own. And then I guess the last thing I would say is change takes time, and it's not linear. You're going to have setbacks. You're going to have disappointments. You got to build a bunch of small wins along the way so people feel progress. And you can't declare victory too early. A lot of times what happens is people declare victory and then they stop paying attention and people go right back to doing what they did before.
Yeah, I agree with you. And I would add some more other things, or maybe a different perspective to the same things you already said. I think any change is a process, and it just takes a lot of time and effort to make it. I think it's up to how you communicate this desired change. It's very important. I mean, like, if you would say to a lot of people, would you like a new shirt? Probably they would say yes. And the other part is you have to throw another shirt from your closet. And that's the more complicated one. That I don't want. I want to leave the other one. It's also a nice shirt. But I think it's how you communicate about it. I mean, like, any change is probably, it might be hard, but in some way it's profitable to the organization and to the employee. It can't be only for one side, because if not, it doesn't change. It doesn't make sense to do it at all. And if you communicate it well to everyone in all levels, why this change is desired to us, it makes sense. And then people really feel, as you mentioned, feel part of it. They understand as their manager why we are bringing this change into our organization. And I would say other thing, all changes are people. I know that I am about talking about people, but it's all about people. Well, people saying, oh, it's finance. Really? Who is doing finance? There are not people around it. There are people. If you are talking about computer or changing things, at the beginning, at the middle, at the end, there are people. And if you are not looking at it as we are working with people around us and next to us, we need to talk to them and communicate in this level to those people to understand why it's important. It is very, very hard to bring it. And I would say what I mentioned before, it's about being authentic and truthful for the whole time. I think for a lot of managers, at some point, the beginning is very glorious, it's really nice, it looks great. But in the middle, there are so many challenges that some managers are cutting corners and trying to say, listen, it's important, don't ask why. Let's just do it. Can you just do it? Okay, just for me. Those kind of, I am your friend, but if I don't understand why to do it, I probably will do it just halfway, as you ask me, halfway. If it's not completely reasonable, they're not going to do it, and not in a really efficient way as you want them to do it. And I think here it's like something that some leaders are falling behind. The last thing that I wanted to add is about the psychology safety, that I find it very critical in all organizations, that people feel comfortable and some place to say it, physical and not physical, to say different things about the change, which usually the managers don't like to hear. And it needs to be heard, because first of all, it will be said either way. Either it will be said just at the coffee without anyone hearing it, just to a colleague, or really in a table that can be really solved in a very original way, like really brainstorming about how to do it with the employee, and rather just give them the solution. Sometimes they can provide the solution even better than the manager. And I have to say that the psychology safety, I heard something funny, that someone told me that, my boss asked me, how is my psychology safety lately? And I thought, you're not serious. He didn't come to you and ask you. She said, yes, he did. And I said, it's not a thing to ask, how are you? It's about, can the manager or the boss have the patience and be able to contain different ideas, not the mainstream rolling that they're, all the keywords that are trying to inject to everybody to use, but a really different ideas that are being heard in the room, and to take them and to really see how I can challenge this and solve this thing that I didn't think before. How can I add this to the table and see every employee as partner in this change?
Right. At the same time, I think it's very important to be very clear on what is and isn't negotiable. Right? There are things that are not negotiable. If we say, we are moving the company from this city to that city, that may not be negotiable. What's negotiable is a lot of the process around doing that. So, and if you give people the misunderstanding that things that aren't negotiable are negotiable, and then you take that away from them, then you're going to have a whole lot of resentment. So remember, as the leader, you do have a responsibility to lead. Now, you do have the responsibility. People need leadership. They need you to lead them. They need you to say, the target is over there, that's where we're going. And I think sometimes leaders, in an effort to be more democratic, in an effort to be more inclusive, they hold back from being very clear on what's definitely happening. And then they sneak it back in there through the process, and that creates a lot of misunderstanding and resentment. So I think it's okay to be articulate and to say, this is what's happening. Now, let's talk about what are the pieces of this, and then who needs to help with what part of this process. And that's where you're going to hear all the pushback, and that's where you need to do all the listening. And you might have to adjust every piece of the how we get there to incorporate that feedback, while keeping the ultimate vision consistent and saying that's we're still going, and we're still going over there.
Yes, agree. I think I think you just said it correctly, from my point of view, that that there are things that are not negotiable, and there are things that we can be, as a manager or leaders, can be open to give them some choices how and where to be involved in the change and how to help with it. I absolutely agree with you. It's not everything is open to negotiable. But yes, you know, whenever you can, I think sometimes there is, you know, like being resilient and saying we can be strong and do this change. But if you want, someone is really, you know, opposing it, sometimes just listening to what he has to say. It's not necessarily that he really wants to change the whole organization and the whole structure, but just listening, the pain of the change, as you mentioned before, it could be very helpful at this point. But I do agree with you about how to take it.
Yeah, and you know, you got to understand what's driving that, right? If they're driven in that conversation by intense insecurity about what their place is going forward, and the first thing I would want to do is hear from them what place they'd like to have going forward, right? Because it could not, maybe it's not even what they're doing now. Maybe they envision themselves doing something different to what they're doing now. And you may or may not be able to give it to them, but you're not even going to be able to have any conversation without at least hearing from them. What is their concern? What are their goals? And then once you have those in hand, then you can work with it. You're not going to be able to make everybody happy. Sometimes when you make changes, not everybody will stay. Some people will just not be a right fit for whatever is the resulting organization. And that's tough. I think as a leader, realizing that the team you're with now may not be the same exact team that you end up with after the change, that's a really hard thing, especially if they're good people and especially if you like them. They still might not be the right fit. And that's one, I think, of the very difficult and painful parts of leadership. And at the same time, you want to create the space for people to adjust and for people to fit themselves into the organization to whatever extent that's possible. And you do that through a conversation where you do some listening and you do some clear communication about what things are going to look like when it's done. And they might be the ones who decide, well, you know, this isn't really what I'm interested in doing going forward, or, oh, here's how I fit in to this new structure, and here's where I feel like I can contribute. Here's what would really excite me about doing it. And then to the extent that you can help them do those things, you're not going to have to push anymore. They're going to be running faster than you can catch up to them.
Yeah. Great. So I see in the chat there is no questions or comments. So I think I will just say a huge thank you to everyone that came to our webinar, and a huge thank you to you, Moshe, for finding the time to be in this webinar. I hope it's helpful and it gives good tips and good advice to whoever listen, and I will definitely try to, if anyone that heard it want to give any feedback, I would love to do it, just to help everyone. And if not, we will continue to see you in LinkedIn and also in some YouTube when I will just put all this conversation. So thank you, everyone. Good to see you and hope to see you in the next webinar. Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you, Nili, for inviting me. Thank you, everybody, for coming. It's so nice to see you. And I hope we talk again soon.
Yeah. Moshe, you can stay for 1 second if you don't mind. Bye, everyone.